history tells a simple story. A beautiful queen who seduced the most powerful men in the world. A simple story. That is a complete and total lie. This was not a seductress. This was a scientist, a chemist, a polymath who spoke 9 languages. She didn't seduce Julius Caesar with her beauty. She outmaneuvered him with her mind, becoming his political and financial partner. So why do we remember the lie? Because history is written by the victors. The Romans, terrified of her intellect, launched the most successful character assassination in history. They created a myth to hide the terrifying truth. Their great empire was almost brought to its knees by the mind of a single woman. You think you know the story of Cleopatra? This film will prove everything you know is wrong. Subscribe now and join us as we declassify the truth about the deadliest mind in the ancient world. To understand the mind that challenged Rome, you must first understand the city that built it. Alexandria. Not just a capital, but the intellectual furnace of the ancient world. Into this world, Cleopatra was born. Not just a princess, but a Ptolemy. A dynasty that valued knowledge as much as power. From a young age, her playground was the Great Library, the single greatest repository of human knowledge ever assembled. While other children played with toys, she played with ideas. She devoured astronomy, mathematics, philosophy. This was her inheritance. A library of the world's wisdom poured into the mind of a single, brilliant child. But her education was not confined to scrolls. It was practical. She learned the hard science of numbers, the logic of logistics. In the bustling streets of her city, a crossroads of cultures, she learned the language of her people. Not just the Greek of her court, but the ancient Egyptian of the common man, and the tongues of traders and diplomats. She was trained in the art of persuasion, her mind honed into a sharp political instrument, capable of commanding a room with logic and rhetoric. Alexandria was the fertile ground, her mind the seed, and the knowledge she absorbed was the water that would allow her to grow into a force of nature. But the Ptolemaic court was a snake pit of intrigue, a place where siblings murdered siblings for the throne. Here she learned her most important lessons in survival. She studied the maps not as a geography lesson, but as a chessboard, understanding the delicate balance of power, the threats, and the opportunities. This was the woman who would soon inherit the throne. A scholar's mind, a politician's tongue, and a survivor's will. She was armed not with bronze and iron, but with something far deadlier, an intellect forged in the heart of the world's greatest city. And she would need every ounce of it because the shadow of Rome was drawing near. But a mind like Cleopatra's bred jealousy and fear. The old guard of the Egyptian court, whispering in the ear of her weak, pliable brother, saw her not as their queen, but as a threat to their power. They made their move. A decree was issued. The rightful queen of Egypt was declared an enemy of the state, cast out of her own capital. They expected her to vanish, a forgotten exile. They underestimated her. She fled not as a victim, but as a commander, raising her own army in the desert, preparing to take back what was hers by force. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, was now the dividing line in a bitter civil war. Sister against brother, queen against king. And then, into this chaos, sailed a new, cataclysmic force. Julius Caesar, fresh from his victory over his rival Pompey, arrived in Alexandria, the most powerful man in the world. Her enemies saw him as their key to victory. But Cleopatra, trapped in the desert, saw him for what he was, a singular opportunity. A dangerous, audacious, once-in-a-lifetime gambit. She orchestrated one of the most daring maneuvers in political history. Smuggled past enemy lines, past her brother's guards, rolled into a commoner's rug. The rug was brought before Caesar, a supposed gift, but the gift was not what he expected. At the feet of the world's greatest conqueror, a queen appeared, defiant, unafraid. She had not come to beg for his help. She had come to negotiate. The Roman propagandists would have you believe what followed was a night of seduction. The truth, as is often the case, was far more intelligent. This was a business meeting. She offered Caesar not her beauty, but the two things he desperately needed. First, the immense wealth of Egypt to pay off his staggering war debts. And second, a stable, competent ally to secure the Roman Empire's breadbasket. He saw in her not a mistress, but a mind that matched his own. Ambitious, ruthless, and brilliant. In the Queen of Egypt, Caesar had finally found his equal. The alliance was sealed. With the civil war won and her throne secure, Cleopatra made her boldest move yet. She came to Rome, not as a conquered subject, but as a visiting monarch. Her arrival was a culture shock. An injection of exotic wealth and ancient knowledge into the stark, militaristic heart of the Republic. The Roman elite expected a barbarian queen. They found, to their astonishment, a philosopher. She held court with the city's greatest thinkers, debating complex ideas with an intelligence that was, to them, both impressive and deeply unsettling. Her influence was not just social, it was scientific. She gave Rome the gift of a stable solar calendar, an intellectual contribution that shapes our world to this very day. And then came her masterstroke, the birth of her son, Caesarion, the son of Caesar. He was more than a child. He was a living symbol, potential heir to both the legacy of the pharaohs and the power of Rome, a threat to the old Roman order. But her influence and Caesar's growing power bred fear and resentment in the halls of the Senate. A conspiracy was born in the shadows, fueled by a fear of kings and queens. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, the trap was sprung. Caesar, the unconquerable general, walked into the Senate house alone and unarmed. What followed was a bloody betrayal. The senators he had pardoned, the men he called his friends, surrounded him with hidden daggers. The Republic saved itself by murdering the man who had mastered it. With Caesar's death, the dream of a stable, united world died with him, and a new age of chaos and civil war was about to begin. For Cleopatra, the news was a political earthquake. In a single moment, her protector, her ally, and the father of her child was gone. She was a foreign queen, trapped in a city that had just murdered her partner. While Rome descended into bloody chaos, she did not panic. The grieving lover was a role she could not afford to play. She was a queen, and her only thought was survival. With cold, calculated precision, she orchestrated a secret and swift escape. Slipping out of the city with her son, the heir before her enemies in the Senate could turn their attention to her. She returned to Alexandria, not as a defeated widow, but as the sole, undisputed ruler of a rich and powerful kingdom. The storm in Rome had destroyed her alliance, but it had also set her free. She was now a major power in her own right, a queen with an heir and an army, waiting to see which of the Roman wolves would come for Caesar's inheritance next. With Caesar gone and Rome in chaos, a new power player emerged, Mark Antony, Caesar's most brilliant and charismatic general. He came to the east, and Cleopatra knew she had to win him over. But this time, she would not come as a supplicant in a carpet. She arrived at Tarsus on a magnificent golden barge, dressed as Venus, the goddess of love. It was a masterpiece of political theater, a spectacle of power and charm designed to completely overwhelm the senses of the passionate Roman general. And it worked. Antony was captivated. But what began as a political necessity blossomed into one of history's most legendary love affairs. They were not just lovers, they were a power couple, forging a new empire in the East to rival the cold ambition of Rome. For a decade, Alexandria was the vibrant heart of their world, a new center of power, pleasure, and culture. A golden age that Rome could not ignore. Back in Rome, Caesar's adopted son, the young, cold, and brilliant Octavian, watched with fury. He masterfully used their love story as propaganda. painting Antony as a Roman traitor bewitched by a foreign sorceress and Cleopatra as the great enemy of Rome. The world was no longer big enough for them both. The final war for the soul of the Roman Empire was at hand. West against East. Octavian against Antony and Cleopatra. At the Battle of Actium, the two great fleets clashed in a brutal struggle for supremacy. The fate of the world hung in the balance. And then, the inexplicable. At a critical moment, Cleopatra's fleet withdrew from the battle. Was it a strategic retreat? A miscommunication? Or an act of betrayal? To this day, no one knows for sure. But the result was a catastrophic defeat. Antony, hearing a false report of Cleopatra's death, fell into despair and took his own life, a tragic end for Rome's greatest soldier. She held him in her arms as he died. The great love story, the grand ambition for a new empire, all of it was over. Octavian marched into Alexandria, the undisputed master of the world. He had one final prize in mind: to capture Cleopatra and parade her in chains through the streets of Rome. The ultimate symbol of his victory. But Cleopatra had one final move to make, one final act of defiance. Dressed in her full royal regalia, the last pharaoh of Egypt took her own life with the bite of an asp. She would not be a prisoner. She would not be a trophy. She would die as she had lived, a queen on her own terms. She lost the war, but in death, she seized control of her own legend forever.